So now it's my turn to thank all of you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I know you took time out of your morning, so thank you for spending it here with me. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. There are bathrooms right outside if you need. Please feel free to continue helping yourself to breakfast. And if you do have a cell phone on you, if you could just turn it to silent, that would be excellent. The next thing is at the end of the presentation, I'm going to be passing out some feedback forms, and those are so helpful to me. So at the end, as we're going through the presentation, be thinking if there's ways that this presentation can be improved, what you kind of took away from it, and at the end, I'm going to ask you just to share that with me. So we've done our intros, and we've had our sponsor, and now we're just going to jump right into it. So wanted to give you a little bit of a vision for what it looks like when we're going to be done with this presentation today. So we will have explored together the equation for change, contrasts between mission, vision, and strategic plan, perspectives on visioning both from researchers and from thought leaders, where visioning fits into the life cycle of business. From there, we're going to talk a little bit about the power of visioning. So how is it powerful in terms of sales, retention, decision-making, and leadership? Next, we're going to go into a little bit more of the process behind visioning. So what are the 4 characteristics of an effective vision? Then what does that process actually look like step by step? And we're going to wrap up today with some visioning techniques and examples. Sound good? Everyone on board? Okay, great. Okay, so first we're going to start off, like I said, with the equation for change. So has anyone heard of the equation for change from the field of organizational development? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? Anybody? Okay. So really what it comes down to is change versus resistance. So anytime we want there to be a change that takes place, we're going to come up against that natural resistance to the change. Why? Because change takes energy and time and effort and resources, all those things. So again, it's not negative that there's resistance, it's natural, but we want to understand how we can overcome it in order to create that real, lasting, sustainable change. So what are the variables involved in this equation? Well, we have dissatisfaction, vision, and first steps of action. So when I say dissatisfaction, of course, it sounds kind of negative, but it's really not. It can actually be very healthy. All it means is there's a gap between where we are and where we want to be. Next is vision, of course, what we're going to be really diving into together today. And then first steps of action. So what's the plan to start us getting where we want to go? So this is what it looks like when we put it into an equation. The idea is that change is what happens when dissatisfaction multiplied by vision multiplied by first steps of action are all greater than resistance. So if we all remember back to elementary school math class, this is a multiplicative equation. So what happens if any of those variables is 0? Exactly, just all zeros out. So really why I like to tee up the presentation this way is that the visioning process affects every single one of these variables, right? So we go into the process because we want some change to occur. Now the process is going to help us identify that gap by helping us really understand where it is we are, how we got there, and then where it is we want to go. Next, it's going to give value to V. It's going to give us a vision. And then it's going to give us first steps of action that are aligned directly with that vision. And lastly, the process itself actually helps to reduce resistance. And that's what it's all about. So again, if we're able to sort of tip the scales, tip the balance in favor of change, then it's going to really take hold and create impact in our organizations and in our lives. So next I want to do a little bit of definition work, just because there are so many different definitions of mission and vision, strategic plan out there, and it's not that any of them are invalid, we just want to kind of get on the same page for the purposes of the workshop today. So when I say vision, I mean a definition of success at a specific point in the future. Now a lot of times when people say vision, you think of a vision statement, right? One of those nice looking phrases or paragraphs in italics and quotes that you see on a plaque somewhere. And that's all fine and well, but when I talk about it, again, I mean a definition of success, very fleshed out, specific definition, and again, a specific point in the future. And I'm talking specific day, of a specific month, of a specific year. Now, when I say mission, I mean something that's out there. It's like our guiding star. It's aspirational. We're never actually going to get there. We never can get there. And the point is actually not to get there. So Regions Bank, we're all familiar with Regions, right? So their mission is to make life better, which is super inspirational, but it's not like you can ever get there. It's not like one day you say, oh, perfect, we have made life better, we're done, we can wrap up shop, all good. It just never happens. But that's, again, not the point. But if we're never actually going to be able to reach our mission fully, we need things along the way, right? We're going to get really tired out if it's always like an oasis that disappears as soon as we get closer. So that's where vision comes in. So if you think of mission like your why, then vision is your where, your when, and your what. So where we're going, when we're going to get there, and what it looks like when we arrive. It's really about the evidence that we've gotten to where we wanted to go. So then when we talk about vision versus strategic plan, the vision is really our destination, okay? It's our destination, and the strategic plan is our directions. So what happens, when you take out your phone, and you open Google Maps, and you want to get somewhere, what's the first thing that it asks you for?
Where are you at?
And then what did it ask you for after that? Where are you going to go? So it's really, really hard to ask for directions if we cannot describe our destination. It's so hard to ask for directions if we cannot describe our destination. So some of us, if we're starting off in a new venture and we want to get somewhere, if we can't help the person that we're asking understand where we're going, it's really hard for them to give us advice. And if we've been doing what we've been doing for a long time, but we can't help the people in our organization understand what that destination looks like, it's really hard to give them directions to help us get there as well. So just like driving, of course, on the way to our vision, we're going to find those roadblocks and obstacles and construction, whatever it might be, and we're going to have to reroute and recalculate. That's all part of it. But the idea is that the destination remains the same, and that's the important piece. Next, I want to talk a little bit about perspectives on visioning. Like I said, first we'll start off with some thought leaders and what they have to say about it. So there was a gentleman named Ron Lippitt who was a social scientist back in the 1950s and 60s, and he studied change in organizations. So everything from huge corporations to school boards, municipalities, small businesses, you name it, he studied it. Okay? And he found that there were really two different schools of thought when it came to creating change within an organization. One was what he called traditional problem solving, which looked a little bit like this. Now, have any of you ever been one of these people? Because I've hopefully not been the guy standing up, but I've been all the other people. So that's what traditional problem solving looks like. And feel free just to find a seat anywhere here on the side. Thank you so much for coming today. So traditional problem solving is we're just looking at the problem and what's the solution. What's the problem and what's the solution? So when we do that, we get so caught up in the how, there's nothing else we can see. And what Ron Lippitt found when he studied these groups was that organizations that focused only on the how really came up with only how not to do it. So it was we can never do that. It's never been done like that. We tried that 5 years ago. John in processing tried that. It never worked. That's what that conversation sounds like. And when that happens, people just shut down. People become more cynical, they become more closed off, they kind of feel like they're hostages to this process. No one wants that. And it reinforces these old connotations of spending all this time and energy, effort, resources to create this plan that's going to become obsolete as soon as the ink dries, and then it's just going to go along with all the other binders in a pretty shelf and gather dust and gather guilt, and nothing's going to actually change. So then what he found was that there was another school of thought, what he called preferred futuring. And these groups said, yes, there are problems, and yes, of course, we need to figure out the how. Of course, we're going to need to figure that out. But before we do that, before we ask the how, let's ask the why, and let's ask the where, the when, the what. So let's figure out where we're going, take a step back, and then let's, again, work backwards from the vision to get where we want to go. And what he found is when organizations focused on that preferred future they wanted, the energy in the room just kept going up and up and up. So out-of-the-box ideas started flowing. People became so much more innovative, open, honest, candid with each other. Because, again, they felt like they were part of that change. That's where that resistance that we talked about, that's that resistance reducing naturally because of the process itself. So I love this quote. It's from one of my favorite geeky books called The Toyota Way to Continuous Improvement. And does somebody want to read this out for me? Anyone? Polly, you want to read this for me?
I'll read it. Only because I'm already doing this with Lois. So what are the thought leaders saying? Avoid settling for incremental fixes to the current state. To think big, we must have a vision that pulls us, rather than tinker with the system as it is.
Thank you. Okay, great. So that, I think, sums it up. That idea of settling for incremental fixes to the current state or tinkering with the system as it is, that's really traditional problem solving. But when we think of thinking big and having that vision that pulls us forward, that is preferred futuring. That is what visioning is all about. So I wanted to real briefly just explain a little bit about my connection to visioning. Now, I know a lot of you who know me well have heard this story about 15 times, so bear with me. But just to give you a little insight into why I'm so passionate about it. I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I had the opportunity to work with an incredible organization called Zingerman's. And at Zingerman's, they are known for bringing in specialty foods from all over the world, but they're also really known for the way that they run their business. And the way that they run their business is that everything at Zingerman's starts with a vision, everything. So whether they're launching a new product or they're going into a busy holiday season, everything starts with a vision. And that really resonated with me. Worked in several different capacities, started a new division, had to create a lot of visioning work for that. And when I was 25, I was really at this crossroads in my life and my career. So I locked myself in the apartment for the weekend and I said, I'm going to ask that really scary question of what do I want my life to look like in 5 years? I mean, what do I really, really, really want? Not what someone else wants from me, but what I want. And that's honestly, I mean, when you really get down in there, it's a scary question to ask. I mean, it's scary because you have to really get down there and address all those hopes and fears and challenges. And it's scary because what if you actually achieved it? So, I mean, those are all really pretty intense questions. But I said, I got to figure this out. I can't ask the universe to deliver it if I can't even describe it. You know, I can't really, that proposition isn't going to work too well. So I cannot tell you how many drafts I wrote and tore up and threw away and started again. But finally, at the end of that weekend, I had my vision and I felt so relieved. I felt like I had a compass. I felt like I had a shield. I knew where I was going. So that compass, I had this direction. And I knew, I mean, the how was going to change a million times. Honestly, that was the adventure. That was the exciting part. I didn't know how I was going to get there. But I knew where it was going to be and I knew it wasn't going to change. And I felt like I had this shield around me. I felt like I had this force field. Things were just going to start dinging off because, again, my destination wasn't changing. I didn't care if something didn't go my way. I knew where I was headed. But at the same time, I realized that it's really hard to do that process alone. And I just didn't want other people to have to go through it alone. And so ultimately, that was the kernel of True North. Back when I was 25, that visioning led me to working in Sicily and Spain, going to India, coming to Birmingham. Now, Birmingham, Alabama certainly is not written into my vision. However, what I'm doing absolutely is, and it's amazing. I wrote it for April 2015. And when I go back and read it, it describes what I'm doing. And that's the power. It's with me every single day. So I want to next talk about visioning and the life cycle of business. So the first one is launch. So, you know, oftentimes we think of launching a new business, launching a new venture, but we're launching all the time. We're launching into a new phase of our career, a new partnership, again, maybe launching a new product. We're going to hold a big fundraiser, whatever, launching a play, whatever it might be, we're always launching. So some people might say, I mean, look, really, you know, a startup especially, things are going to change so much in the first 6 months, let alone the first couple of years. What's the point? I mean, how can you possibly write a vision? And the idea is that, my goodness, things are going to change so much, and that's exactly why we need a vision, right? We need to get down to what I call our non-negotiables. So we need to understand, for us, what we are unwilling to live without. Now, for some people, they might say, you know, my non-negotiable is that we're going to be the best brick and mortar in town. That's the non-negotiable. Others might say, I'm going to leave that vague. I don't know if we'll grow from an online shop to a brick and mortar. I don't really care about that. What I care about is the experience that my clients have when they get their products, or the camaraderie among my team. Maybe that's their non-negotiable. Whatever it is, it's not right or wrong. It's just different. They have to figure that out from the start. The other thing is that it's so important for us to understand when we're going into a venture with someone else, sort of what that end game is. Because sometimes, you know, at the start of it, it's really exciting and ideas are going off and, you know, we're staying up late together, having some beers and coming up with ideas and it's a blast. And then 6 months later, we realized we never actually had the same vision. We already have invested all those time, energy, effort, again, all those resources. So wouldn't it be nice if we could figure that out beforehand? Wouldn't it be nice if we could sort of reveal alignment or misalignment ahead of time and then see if we can bring it back to a more unified state? If not, no harm, no foul, we can part ways. But if yes, let's move forward with purpose, with vision together. So I worked with a gentleman in Atlanta, and for him, he was starting up a business, and it was just about helping him connect the dots, really get out, extract all those ideas in his head and get them down onto paper. The next is crossroads and transition. So just like I was at that sort of transitionary point in my life, we're always in transition in our businesses, in our careers, always. And what happens? So either we are paralyzed by indecision and we go absolutely nowhere, or we go a little bit down one road and kind of come back. We go a little bit down the other road and kind of come back. And what happens, you know, when you see squirrels running across the road, right? When do they always get killed? When they stop, on the way back, exactly. So we do not want to be the squirrel. Let's not be that squirrel, okay? So really, I had this client who came to me and she said, you know, she had this urgency. I have to figure this out. I could take this road or this road. Which do I take? And I said, hey, first, chillax. Second, you know, those questions are going to be answered by your future, not your present. So the question isn't which road do I take, it's where am I going? And once you clarify that, once you understand that, it becomes so immediately clear. I take this road, or I take this road, or actually, I don't take any of these roads at all. I go a completely different way. And I worked with a photographer in town who was in a big crossroads and transition, trying to kind of understand where his stylistic abilities would be best spent. And for him, it was sort of like career therapy, sort of transformative to go through this process, because again, getting that clarity really changed everything for him. The next one I want to talk about is growing pains. So this can be kind of manifested in two different ways. One is that red arrow that's just butting up against that wall and cannot break through. So we've all been there. It's not fun. What happens when we get there? Well, what happens is that we revert to that traditional problem solving, right? All we can see is that wall in front of us and the little chips sort of breaking off as we hit our head again and again and again, and we just cannot break through. So when we get to that point, it can be extremely helpful to take a step back and say, we got to get over this wall or break through it or whatever, tunnel under it, I don't care, but let's not worry about that right now. Let's, again, get that vision back. Let's understand where it is that we are going, and once we do that and give ourselves a breather, then we can finally get over that hump. The next is this green arrow that's just busting through the wall. And that's that exponential growth, sort of when that growth is outpacing the original capacity. So we all know that it's really exciting to be the green arrow, right? But it's also really overwhelming, can be really scary. And the reason is because we introduce exponential complexity as our organization grows. Exponential, it's incredible. Hey there, and I think a seat for you right over here if you want. Thanks so much for coming today. So anyhow, when we have that complexity in our business, if you can imagine when you start off your business, it's like if you're in a canoe, right? You're just going along in your canoe, and if you get off course, it's no big deal. You can just kind of do your paddle a little bit differently. Helen, I'm sure I'm botching this metaphor terribly. But anyway, you get the idea. You can get back, and it's no big deal, not a lot of energy involved, and you get back home by lunch. Excellent. But once our organization grows, it's more like we're driving a steamship at this point, okay? So we're going so much faster, and there are so many more people on the ship with us that we probably aren't going to figure out that we're off course for a long time because we're so distracted answering everyone's questions, dealing with everyone's monkeys that they've left on our desk, right? So now we're so much more farther off course. Once we finally realize it, it's going to take a lot of energy to come back on course. But the thing is, we never actually set the course in the first place. So usually we overcorrect, overshoot it, and head out more the other direction. So that's, again, when visioning is so crucial. As our organization grows, we have to be able to get everyone on that ship rowing in the same direction at the same time to the same place. And when we do that, we make incredible, incredible headway. So I was working with a woman who's an executive director of a big networking organization, and for her it was just about having a way to clearly communicate that vision to her staff, helping them understand what was in it for them. I mean, what was going to happen when they got to that finish line. The next one I want to talk about, and the final one for this section of the presentation, is the idea of nested visions. So typically when we think of a vision, we think maybe a long-term 5, 10, 3-year vision, right? And we definitely want to have those in place. But when we do, we can also create visions that sort of align up within them. And I think of those in 3 different terms: organization, time, and team. So organization is when we have an overarching vision for the company, for the business, whatever it might be. And then there are departments or divisions within that business that have their own visions that, again, align up within it. So when that happens, they're able to take that much more ownership and help sort of drill down into their specific area of the business. But again, it's got to align with the greater vision. The next one is time. So again, we talked about these longer-term visions, but shorter-term visions can be extremely powerful. So personally, when I was in Spain, I was writing 3-month visions. When I was in Italy, I was writing 2-week visions. When I was on the West Coast for Zingerman's trying to find new artisan food producers, I was writing daily visions. I still write daily visions. And again, I'm not sitting there for 3 hours, penning this perfect thing. I mean, it's just quick, that's it, it's done. At Zingerman's, we would write visions for a shift. If it was going to be a really intense shift, holiday season, staying up all night, eating brownies at 3 a.m., that's what we did because we sold brownies. So, we would write a vision for that shift. What is it going to look like at the end? How are we going to know that it's successful? Okay, so that can be so extremely powerful. And if we're going into a big event that we have coming up, what's the vision for it? What would it look like? How would we know that it was successful? The next one is team. So again, we might have this overarching vision, but sometimes an owner of a business might want to take a step back and say, I've been doing this for years. I've been pouring my heart and soul and everything into this business. And maybe it's time for me to take a step back and just see, is this still my vision? And it absolutely might be, or it might have changed. But it's that opportunity to take a step back and understand for themselves. Because again, they got to drive the organization. The next one is that organizations might say, hey, we have some rising stars, and we really want them to go through a process to help them understand what is important to them and what it looks like for them when they succeed. And when we do that, sometimes we unlock things that we never, ever would have guessed. It can be so, so crucial to do that. And now I'm going to forget where I was, but I think there was one more piece, and I'm going to skip by it because I don't remember what it was. Okay, the next one is, the next quote that I wanted to share with you guys is from Barbara Trawick, who's the executive director here at the Early Childhood Learning Center. And for her, she talked about the fact that getting her vision down on paper was a tremendous weight lifted off her shoulders because she was able to see the difference in her staff, and her staff could see the difference in her when she finally got that vision down on paper, when she finally communicated it to them. So next I want to go into the power of visioning. So we've talked about where visioning fits in the life cycle of business. Now let's talk a little bit about how it can be powerful. So I want to read this quote to start. It's by a gentleman named Bill Caskey, who's a great sales trainer. And he says, when there is no vision, how do we know we're doing the right things on a daily basis or utilizing our assets in the right place? So the idea is that in sales, sometimes we are chasing deals and chasing opportunities that actually get us farther away from accomplishing what we really want, because again, we never actually figured out what it was we really want. So we get caught up in activity and caught up in being productive, but we might not be being productive in the right way, if that makes sense. So I want to just sort of illustrate it with an example. So let's imagine that we have this company, right? And their whole thing is that they build paths through jungles. So they get together and they say, okay, we're going to get our best team together. We got, word from corporate, we got to hit our numbers this month. So let's get the best team out there and let's build this path through the jungle. Okay? So they assemble the team, they give them the best path building tools on the market, and they say, go out there and do it. So every day they're out there, they're building the path, using a lot of materials, ordering extra materials, getting them sent overnight, clocking in a lot of overtime. So all that's good, right? That means they're being productive, right? Overtime definitely means they're being productive. So that's what they think. They think they're doing a real good job. But when they come back together and take a helicopter and say, hey, let's actually take a look at the path that you guys built, this is what they found. So not the best end game. So they just went up and down and loop, and that was it, and they didn't actually get anywhere. Now there was a competitor who got their leadership team together and said, okay, whoa. Before we figure out even the team or the materials or any of that, let's figure out where it is we actually want to go. So, okay, here's where we are, and that's the destination, so X marks the spot. And then we can figure out, okay, that's the team that we need to get us there because this is the path we're going to take. Get them together and say, hey, you're the boots on the ground. What do you think is the best way to get from point A to point B? And at that point, those guys just said, well, we could order all those supplies or we could just string a zip line. That would be a lot more fun and a lot more efficient. So that's really what it's all about. You can save so much time and energy if we just figure out the destination first. Thanks, Polly. Oh. No, thanks for laughing. Tough crowd. So the next thing I want to talk about is, have any of you read the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek? Okay, great. Polly, again, you're killing it this morning. Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm getting all tangled in my cord. Yeah. So anyhow, this was actually an ad in the London Times by English adventurer Ernest Shackleton. And he says, men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. So the whole idea here is that, why is this important? Well, first of all, job ads don't look like that anymore, which is unfortunate. But the idea is that he set out with this group of travelers in the early 20th century, 27 men gathered together, and they went on this ship called the Endurance. They went across the Antarctic, and it was going to be epic, absolutely epic. Now, what happened was they actually got caught in the ice floes, and they were stranded for 10 months. And then after 10 months, the ship sank. And then he went out on about an 800-mile journey and finally got help, and they were all rescued, okay? So what's so miraculous about that? Well, a lot of things. But the biggest is that no one died, no one resorted to cannibalism, there was no mutiny. And why was that, right? Why was that? Well, it's because he had survivors on his ship. And why was that? It's because he got people who believed what he believed. Anyone who read that ad was a survivor, and they were a believer. And he wasn't going to get anyone else. No one else need apply, right? So the difference is that nowadays, this is what our job ads look like. Account executive needed, minimum 5 years experience, fast-growing company, great pay and benefits. So first of all, that tells us absolutely nothing about the company because that all sounds the same, right? We've all worked for this company, we've all quit this company as well. So, right, it's a true story. So that's the difference. Nowadays, our job descriptions are all focused on the what you're going to be doing, not why you're doing it. And that's the difference. That's what we need to get back to. The next reason why it helps us improve decision making is, is anyone here familiar with lean? Anybody? Okay, do you want to give us just a quick one-sentence description of lean?
I believe it's how to make a process as efficient as possible.
Absolutely. How to make a process as efficient as possible. Exactly right. So Toyota, the car company, is sort of one of the grandfathers of lean, if you will. And they say that if any process has more than one decision point, it is a broken process. Now that sounds a little intense, right? Like, whoa, easy killer. However, that's really what visioning gives us. It just gives us one question to answer. So it's just, is this getting me closer to or farther away from my vision? And that's it. And Toyota also says that eliminating decision points really helps to facilitate continuous flow. So the idea is that if every time we have to make a decision about something, then we're going to get stopped. And what happens? We have to have that much more energy to restart. So I'll give you a quick example, again with Zingerman's. Now, when they started about 35 years ago, they were super popular, okay? They were slinging the best corned beef in town and this and that. Now, people started calling them from all over the country saying, hey, do you want a franchise? Now, for some people, that would be their vision. That might be even their non-negotiable. They would want a franchise. But Zingerman's felt a little differently. The thing is, though, at that point, every time someone called to say, do you want a franchise, they had to decide. But they couldn't decide. They had to gather the leadership team and get together and order the snacks and do the thing and really decide just on that one specific instance. And what would happen the next day? Someone else would call, and they'd do it all again. So then one of the partners said to the other, okay, I know the busboy did not show up today, and I know that the dishwasher is broken, but we have to figure this out now. Done. That's it. So they got together and they wrote the vision. And what they realized is they did not want a franchise. They wanted to grow in a different way. And they've actually gained a ton of notoriety for the way that they have grown. But the difference was now they eliminated that decision point. And so much more continuous flow was able to happen in that organization. Because now every time that phone rings and someone says, do you want a franchise? What's the answer? No, no thanks. That's it. No big deal, no meetings, no nothing. So then that leadership team could be taking all that energy that had been wasted before and actually channel it into being of value to their organization. So it also helps, like I was saying before when we were talking about the different job descriptions, it helps us with recruitment and retention and selection of who we want on our team. So if we know what our vision is, we're going to be able to figure out the best people to get there. And like one of our fantastic folks in the room here today, Jeff McDowell, they actually use it as a tool to recruit people. So he actually had his vision, and when he was hiring assistants, he said, here, read this vision. And one of two things happens. Either their eyes glaze over or their eyes light up. And before you even ask a single question, you know if it's worth an interview. And when he found the one whose eyes lit up, guess what? She's knocking it out of the park, right?
Dog dancer?
Mm-hmm.
Dog dancer?
Exactly.
That's how he introduced himself.
So,
She runs the show.
so now that we've selected and recruited our people, how do we actually retain them, right? How do we retain our people? So that's where visioning comes in as well. So what it's all about at that point is helping us tell our staff, hey, it's not about laying bricks. We are actually building a cathedral. We're building a cathedral together. But again, as leadership, it's our job to help them see what that cathedral looks like. And that really changes everything. So once we clarify that picture for people, we engage them so much more. Because again, the vision isn't about the how. The plan is, but the vision's not. So when we say, here's what the cathedral is going to look like, but again, hey, you're laying the bricks, you're doing the stained glass, you help us figure out. It's going to get them so much more involved in that process. Now, when we unify people around a common vision, we really transform things. Because people want to be part of something bigger than themselves, right? People want that, they need that. And so again, when we're all rowing in the same direction, we all have that same cathedral in our head, because again, we've all been in the place where you're like, yeah, cathedral, yeah, totally, the cathedral, it's awesome. But you're thinking one thing and you're thinking another, and we don't even realize it. So again, once we clarify, unify around that common vision, we transform. And then lastly, when we inspire people, when they can see it, when they can look up and say, oh my goodness, when it's there, it's going to be absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous, and so much is going to happen inside of it. I mean, that's a pretty big reward. Now, I'm not going to say, oh, it's better reward than a paycheck. Everyone wants a paycheck, yes, of course. But at the same time, at the end of the day, if you have that and you have the reward of that completed vision, you've taken things to a whole new level. So I also want to talk about the way that visioning can help us really increase effectiveness with our teams. So as servant leaders, really our number one charge is to provide vision. That is our job. It is our job. So there was this Harvard Business Review study done in about 2009, and they surveyed people all over the world. And the question they asked was, what would you say is the single most distinguishing factor between a leader and a non-leader? Now, they didn't mean who had leader on their nameplate or anything like that. They meant who you would willingly follow or who you would not. And anyone want to guess what the single most distinguishing factor was?
Vision.
You guys are crazy. Yeah, something to do with vision, right? So it was the ability to envision the future and enlist other people in getting there. That was what it was all about, right? Be able to envision the future and enlist other people in getting there. The other piece is that it'll make sure that we're not always having a moving target, right? Have any of you been in that situation where you work, and then the last minute your boss is like, oh, gonna move the goalpost. Ha, never mind about that. Skip the pizza party, never mind. So we've all been there, and it's terrible. I mean, it's terrible. And what happens to morale? The wind goes out of the sails, absolutely. No one wants to go for that new goal because it's just gonna change again. So again, that vision gives us those destination points, and it's a promise to each other, a living, breathing promise that we have to keep every single day that says, this is where we're going. We're gonna get there together. And when we do, we're actually gonna stop for a second. We're gonna mark it, and then we're gonna move forward from there. So really, at the end of the day, visioning empowers us. That's what it's all about, proactive versus reactive. And Ari Weinsweg, who really co-founded Zingerman's, he always says it's about moving towards the future that we want rather than away from the present day reality that we don't like. So again, just that mindset shift is completely different, moving towards the future we want, not away from the current day reality that we don't like. So now we're going to go into a little bit more about the process behind visioning. Okay, what does effective visioning actually look like? So we'll start off with the four characteristics of an effective vision. So it's got to be inspiring. It's got to be inspiring. It has got to get us out of bed in the morning. So I can't tell you, remember that story when I was in the apartment, I was writing all those drafts and everything of the vision, and I remember I wrote one and it was great. The sentences flowed and the paragraphs were nice and flowery and all of that. But at the end of the day, I read it and it didn't give me butterflies in my stomach. And so I knew, scrap it. I spent like 3 hours, whatever, it doesn't matter. I have to start again. Because again, if it doesn't give you butterflies, then you're not on the outside edge of your comfort zone. And that's where we want to be in our vision. If someone reads it and they don't get to the end and they're not a little bit freaked out about how they're actually going to make it happen, it's not enough. We got to go a little farther. Next, it's got to be strategically sound. It has to be attainable. So I always tell people, I will write you a vision, but I will not write you a fantasy. I won't. I just will not. And the reason is because, again, if we have a vision that's inspiring, but it's not strategically sound, it just undermines the entire thing. We know it's kind of a pipe dream, so no one really attaches any value to it. But if it has both of those, we're in pretty good shape. Next, it's got to be documented. And this is where a lot of people, I wouldn't say fall short, but a lot of people just don't realize that their vision isn't being implemented. So I can't even tell you how many visionary leaders there are around, but that vision is locked up in their mind and it is stuck. And the thing is that they get really frustrated. They get really frustrated because no one's carrying through on their vision, but then they realize they never actually shared it with them in the first place. And again, if we're talking to someone in the meeting and they hear a little bit of the vision, we talk to someone else, it's like telephone. That cathedral is looking really different in everyone's minds. But when we document it, it gives us that accountability, gives us that shareability to be able to call everyone back to that vision and say, yes, this is still where we're going. It also allows us to, when times are tough, kind of have a life raft. So we all know that things can look like failure in the middle, right? Of any project, anything that we're going through, it can look like failure when we're right in the heart of it, right in the middle of it. And it's easy to be like, yeah, remember that time we talked about the vision, but you don't really remember that conversation, right? It's fine. But no, that's not what we want to do. We want to say, yes, this is the hardest time, so let's pull out that vision. And let's say, yes, let's stick to it. We have to use it as a rallying cry to tell everyone, we're still going to get there. We just have to get creative about the how. It's also got to be shared. So I always say a vision is nothing. It's nothing if it's not shared. So if it stays locked up within you, that's where it ends. And I remember I had a client who at the end, she's like, whoa, wait, I got to share this with people? I was like, yes, of course. We would not have done this entire process if you were just going to keep it for yourself. It's not like tuck under your bed and read at the end of the night. And people do that, and that's really important. But you got to share it with other people too. So ultimately, when we share it with everyone, what we do is we kind of unlock synchronicity. Okay, when people understand where you're going, again, in this very specific, documented, articulated, distilled way, they're going to start saying things to you like, I never knew you wanted that. Well, I have this connection. Let me hook you up. Let me connect you with this other person to help you get where you want to go. And things just start to, honestly, it kind of gives me goosebumps thinking of my own visions and my clients' visions. Things start to become visible that were invisible before. I mean, it really, really is like that. It's kind of wild. It gives you really goosebumps thinking about it. So next, just to kind of wrap up today, before we go into some examples, I'm going to talk about visioning step by step. And then we're going to end today by reading some real life examples from visions that I've worked on with clients. So here's what it looks like. This is sort of the deep dive visioning process that I've really developed to help people go through. And the first piece is helping them understand how they got to where they are, everything that has led them to that moment. And the reason is because before we move forward, we have to understand where we came from. We have to be able to connect those dots and see the common thread in our past before we can see it in the future. Next, we want to understand what is working and what is not. So again, here, traditional problem solving would revert and focus only on what's not working. And that's kind of where the process would end. But here we're saying, well, what is working? We want to build on that. That's our strong foundation. We want to keep all that going. Next is values versus realities. And I always find this to be one of the most fascinating parts of the process because that's where people really dig down and say, what are those guiding principles? What are those core values that I hold so important? And where are my actions aligning with that? And where is there a gap? Because so much of the vision is going to be what it would look like if that gap was narrowed. The next is sort of looking at the events and trends and developments going on in the economy, the industry, the community, all those different pieces, just to kind of give us some context and ground the vision in reality. Now, the important piece here is that visioning comes from the inside out. So while market research and pie charts and all that, it definitely has its place, that place isn't really necessarily envisioning, because here we want to say this is, again, our outlook, our perspective on the opportunities that we see around us. Next is where we're going, and this is the meat, the heart of the process. And that's where we're really asking our future selves, what does it look like? What's it like there? I want to get there someday, so tell me all about it. I mean, that's really, really when we deep dive into the vision and help, again, to start connecting the dots at that point again. So from there, we end up with so much material, and at that point, we're going to start to, again, articulate it and distill it down to sort of a manageable piece that we can, again, share with people, get documented, and go from there. The next is supports and restraints. So now we have this really inspiring vision in place, right? Strategically sound, it's documented, we're ready to share it. But we're going to meet some supportive and sort of motivational forces on the way there, and we're going to come up against restrictive and blocking forces. So instead of just pretending that that's not going to happen, let's identify, yes, of course it's going to happen, and let's figure out how do we activate those motivational forces, and how do we minimize or neutralize those restrictive or blocking forces. And those forces, of course, start within ourselves. Even if we're the ones that want the change to happen, sometimes we're often the most scared of that change actually happening. So we look within ourselves first, and then into our network, friends, family, etc., and then we go on to our organization, our community, and what are going to be those forces that we come up against. The next is plan of action. So again, now that we have the vision in place, let's figure out how to work backwards and get to where we want to go. And once we have this plan in place, then we're going to look at how do we implement this, how do we make sure we stick with it, and then what's the celebration plan? So again, we talked about the fact that it's so important to stop and mark and take a breath and celebrate. And as a lot of my clients, some of which are in this room today, will tell you that they will have these incredible, far-reaching visions, and that they're totally good with. When it comes to making them do a celebration plan, yeah, it's tough work.